Drake Group Education Fund is dedicated to educating the public and professionals in our business with fact-based information, featuring the experts in our profession so that we might all do a better job of helping college athletes realize the promise of an educational degree and becoming all they can be as students and athletes. So we welcome you to our 55th webinar. Thanks to all of our panelists for their time, expertise, and ideas, and to all of you for attending. Webinars provide us with the opportunity to share new ideas, recalibrate our thinking on issues, and get up to date on important topics. We're pleased to have you join us. And lastly, before you meet our moderator panelists, I just want to emphasize that our speakers are expressing their own opinions and not the opinions of the organizations in which they are employed or our members, unless they make that distinction. Now I'm honored to introduce the moderator of today's program. Please meet Nicole Kraft, Professor of Journalism Practice at The Ohio State University and Director of Ohio State's Sports and Society Initiative for her leadership as chair of our Journalism Investigative Contest. It's all yours, Nicole.
Thanks so much, Julie. Hello, everyone. I am so honored and privileged to be here with you. Before we get started, I just want to mention that when you registered, you received the selection committee's biographies, but I just wanted to introduce the people who are going to be joining us here today. With great thanks, I have two of our judges, Wayne Dries, a visiting associate professor of practice at the University of Iowa, formerly of ESPN, and I'm sure you read his story when he found Steve Bartman when no one else could, and three-time Emmy Award winner. And then also we have Jen Smith, my very good friend from the University of Kentucky. She's an award-winning journalist and an award-winning faculty member there in their School of Journalism and Media. We had other members of our committee that unfortunately couldn't join us, but we want to thank them. Mitch Stacy from the Associated Press, as well as Alan Creda from the Associated Press, who also writes for Bloomberg News and the New York Times, and Brian White, who was the sports editor of the Columbus Dispatch and was former lead editor of NBCSports.com and MSN.com. And we thank our award winners that are present today. So really excited to be talking about the stories that we were just thrilled to read and thrilled to honor with this award this year. Our first place winners come from Indiana University and the Indiana Daily Student, and the title of their article was, "Could Big Ten Schools Use NIL Deals to Circumvent the Salary Cap?" It was written by Mia Hilkowitz, Nathan Schreiberg, Savannah Sloan, and Casey Watkins. And we are very excited that some of our authors could be here today. Nathan, I believe you're here, a sophomore at Indiana, majoring in sports media with a minor in sports marketing and management. And he is sports editor and men's basketball reporter with the Indiana Daily Student. So thanks for taking a break from watching NCAA basketball to join us today. Our second place winners from the University of Missouri and the Columbia Missourian, Missed Opportunities. The MU international athletes face NIL restrictions. Other athletes don't. And Jacob Tucker, a sports business reporter and economics student, is here with us. He says he has a passion for storytelling, for telling stories that aren't always seen on the field. And current focus is helping people understand the evolving financial and economic landscape behind college sports. I think we could all use education in that, Jacob. So thanks so much for being here. And then we have our third place winner from the University of Washington in the Daily. Washington Gymnastics Suffers from Dangerously Insufficient Facilities, written by Jared Tucker and Leah Downing. Jared is the co-sports editor at the Daily of the University of Washington, and he serves as the primary beat writer covering UW football and women's basketball. He's covered women's basketball in the past as well, and he's a junior studying journalism. And Leah Downing is a third-year student at the University of Washington studying journalism and public interest communication with a minor in international studies, and she's also engagement editor at the Daily UW while continuing to serve as a reporter and photojournalist. So we are super excited that you are all here with us, and congratulations. I want to start actually with our judges just for a second, because this fundamentally is a contest looking at investigative journalism, which we don't necessarily, I think, appreciate as much as we should. We're kind of maybe wrapped up in game coverage and things that are maybe a bit lower hanging fruit or quicker to get to. What is the importance of investigative journalism in the journalistic landscape, especially in sports? And maybe, Jen, you could start and help us kind of launch this off.
Sure. In my mind, it's the most important component we can do. I think we have to cover sports like a business, like we would a politician. You know, we're not going to go to a press conference for the president with a red MAGA hat on our head, the same way we shouldn't be going into coverage of sports teams, even the ones that we go to school with and are interested in, wearing, you know, whatever your team color is. And I think above all else, sports is sort of ripe for bad things happening to voiceless people, people who maybe don't have the capacity or the people don't allow them to sort of specifically athletes, female athletes, don't allow them to have a voice in a lot of these components. I think now, especially when we're talking about, I know we're not talking about the stories yet, but the first story was really close to my heart because I just finished an academic journal article about NIL and how the press can now not really cover NIL. Its hands are sort of tied. I think of the 33 states that have NIL laws on the books, 19 of them have built things into their law to make things not foyable. And the idea that we have these people making $2 to $5 to $8 million in, a season, and we have no idea how they're being paid or what they're being paid versus, say, female athletes on their campus. Those sorts of things are the things that I dig into big. I think it's important. I covered football at University of Kentucky for 10 years. I covered women's basketball, and I sort of saw the differentials. I saw how things were handled differently. And so, I think that especially college sports is filled with all of these potential abuses, potential hush hush things going on behind the scenes. And if you don't have people investigating those things, nothing's going to change. There'll be no public outcry to make change.
Absolutely. And Wayne, you've certainly done your fair share of investigative reporting. What separates an investigative piece from just maybe what we would consider a fairly standard feature?
Well, I think Jen nailed it when she talked about these stories not being low-hanging fruits. I think what separates a great investigative piece, honestly, is that it's really, really hard to do and to do well. It takes a publication that's willing to dedicate the resources and the time it takes to do these sorts of stories. It takes a reporter that isn't easily bullied or
Dissuaded.
intimidated. I mean, the reality is most of these stories, the people in power don't want them to come out, right? And I always tell my students, the more resistance you are facing when you're reporting a story, the more you're probably onto something really important. And I think these are sort of the characteristics of this type of work. I think, in this sort of media place that we are in right now, I think this is what separates great journalism from what we, traditionally, we could cover a game, write a great game story, and you'd get a pat on the back. Well, today, right, we all know that fewer and fewer people are engaging with that type of content. What still stirs headlines and prompts conversation is great investigative reporting that reveals wrongdoing, that reveals cheating, that protects those who otherwise don't have protection. And look, I said this, but the powers that be would like it all to go away. And so I am grateful for these students who pursue this type of work and organizations that support it.
Absolutely. And just last question for the two of you for the moment. What made these stories stand out? When you were doing the judging, what was it about the ones that are our winners here that really made them be the ones that rose to the top for you?
Yeah, for me, I think it was the stories, especially the winner, that didn't just sort of accept what was on the surface, that dug deeper, that put forward the request to uncover the data and reveal what it looks like beyond just an anecdotal sense, to have the information, the statistics behind it, really was what impressed me.
How about you, Jen?
For me, it was just sort of the constant moving parts that went along with this. Like in a lot of places, you file the request, they say no, you try to figure out how to get what you need still and file another request. Like just the idea that you had all of these schools involved that you were trying to get information from and were able to sort of stay on top of that ever changing. I mean, I think of it like that old shell game where like you had like these, 3 or 4 shelves, with a ball underneath one of them, and you're constantly moving them around, trying to trick people into picking the wrong shell, like that magic trick. So I feel like when I was reading that reporting for the winning story, it really struck me just how often universities are playing that game with us, that they're moving things around, not letting you think about what might be under this one. And they'll distract you with this shiny thing, or they'll give you this information redacted. Like being able to sort of separate yourself from the information and say, this is what I want, this is what I need, how can I get it? And I felt like that reporting really showed me that. And then on the second place story specifically, I really love when a great investigative story can give me a person to focus on, can give me a people story that really like helps you sort of center it and makes you understand that this is about more than numbers. It's about this bigger thing. It's impacting people's lives. And so I really appreciated that about the second story, I think the Missouri story.
Excellent. Well, let's get into these stories and kind of figure out how you guys were able to do this work. We're just so privileged that we were able to be part of this kind of tail end of the experience. We'd like you to maybe get us started on the front end of it. So, Nathan, would you be willing to, we're hoping you'll be willing to kind of let us know how you got started with this story. And I know you're representing a group of reporters, but what was it that came to the surface for you, and how did you pursue that?
Well, this story started long before I got involved with it. This came from a partnership with the IDS and the Arnold Center for Investigative Journalism, is another organization here at IU that was organized and led by Mia Hilkowitz, who was a co-author of the story, but unfortunately couldn't be here today.
She's on a cruise, so we have limited sympathy for her, but yeah, we're glad you're here.
It was also co-led by Jacob Spudich, who was a former editor-in-chief and graduated last May. And what they were really interested in obtaining the NIL disclosures from all the Big Ten schools. And like you said, there's a lot of resistance. One of them is just that you can't even request all of them because there's private universities, varying state laws, specifically Nebraska, you need to be a resident. So we were only able to request 14 of the 18 schools. And as we got the results, and there had to be a long series of appeals, and there's a lot of stuff that was redacted. 6 of the 14 sent us heavily redacted data. 8 either rejected or never replied. And so as we were able to start going through the data, what the idea kind of transformed into kind of transparency, just to kind of figure out what exactly is happening and how are these schools disclosing their annual money. And the thing that we were really stuck on, or that they were really stuck on early, was we knew that this data was out there. Schools are obligated to report it as a de-identified data set to the NCAA every year. So it's not like we were asking them to create a whole new set of data that doesn't exist. They have it. So it was just a matter of chasing it, and we were able to get some redacted data from those schools and find out really that there's not a whole lot of barriers and not a lot of things that we would know of for if a violation were to occur. The public would be far from the first people to know about any sort of violation. Even at different times, the schools would be. So it kind of morphed from just trying to figure out how these things happen to just what is going on behind the scenes and how can we maybe ensure that everybody around it is more knowledgeable on how the system works so that it can't be taken advantage of.
Why did you feel like this was such an important story to do at this time? And I know I recognize that you came into it, maybe not at the beginning of the research on it, but as you were kind of digging through it, what were some of the key things that you hoped that the readers would be able to take away from it?
Well, I think the number one thing is just how little we still know. Um, Even though we were able to get data, like I said, it was heavily redacted. And one of the things that stuck out to me as we were going through is that even when we were able to get data on some of the payments that were made and the values, like dollar amounts for strikingly high numbers that go out to these athletes, we don't know who they are, what sport they're going to, and for the most part, we don't even know what they were for. The biggest category of things, they were all the sets of data that we got with the different NIL disclosures were organized by category. So you would have some things that were like this money is for a meet and greet, this is for a social media post, and there was a bunch of different categories that weren't consistent by school at all. But the most consistent thing was that the majority of the high paying disclosures were in the other category. So it stuck out. It was striking to me that a lot of the the highest value payments, we still have no idea what they were for.
That's a
Nathan, one thing that I wanted to mention, when I covered Kentucky, I would do SEC open records request, and we'd always run into that thing that you hit with Nebraska and Florida. One of the things that I did every time I needed a Florida one was I would contact an AP reporter in Florida and send them my request, and they would file it themselves for me. This happened in Tennessee too, I think, from time to time. So if you ever do something like this again, that might be a really good way to sort of circumvent the garbage system that they have there.
100%. That's a great suggestion. Oh, well, Jacob, you also confronted NIL topics, I've had the great fortune of teaching many international student athletes, and I know one of them just transferred from Ohio State because he was so limited in his ability to get funding in our opportunities. And so I'm curious, kind of where what driving force was behind this story, and what were the things that maybe surprised you about it.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. I actually think this story is one that is well too late. I mean, NIL became a thing in 2021 when the NCAA changed those rules to allow athletes to be paid from those third parties for the first time. And, it's been almost 5 years since then. But this came to my attention because the Kobe Walker, the runner who is kind of the featured athlete in my story, she has a huge following on TikTok, on social media, like other sites as well. And I was like, I wanted to know, like, is she getting paid for that? Is she like, why does she do it? And I was talking to her and also talking to a couple of PR students at the University of Missouri as well who worked with these athletes to kind of help develop their brands. And they were both telling me, like, no, while they're here on campus, they can't make any NIL money whatsoever. The only way they could do it was, going back to their home country. In Walker's case, that would be Australia. So I wanted to just show how there were some discrepancies, some inequities between domestic athletes versus international athletes. And I think her story, I mean, it really stood out to me because so many people follow her and she's got a huge brand already, but there's not much that she can do with it in the NIL space where other athletes who maybe not are the best players on the field, but have a big brand, who are well known, can make thousands, in some cases, millions of dollars. So I think that was where it kind of got started for me.
What were some of the biggest, I mean, in terms of your reporting on it, what were the biggest things that maybe surprised you, or some things that you were really hoping the readers could take away that maybe they were unaware of? And I think a lot of people are unaware in general that many of our international student athletes are not making any money, let alone a decent amount of money. But what were some other of the key elements that came out for you?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things was when I was talking to Josh Wilds, the immigration lawyer from New York. He was basically telling me, like, these rules around NIL for international athletes are basically subject to the United States immigration laws themselves. And there's another layer of restrictions and regulations that they have to go through that other athletes don't. And it seems obvious now to me looking back at it, but I don't know. It's like when you're just covering the surface of sports, like it's not something you would even think about. Even if you are covering NIL, it's not something that might not be like super clear. Another thing was this idea of like passive versus active income and the distinction there. And what I found was like the NCAA and the US immigration rules kind of have this like yin and yang kind of thing there because the NCAA in general doesn't like doing the passive income. They want all of these deals to be, for a valid business purpose, like Nathan and your group were talking about in your article. But when you're talking about active income, like actually doing things for a payment, the U.S. immigration authorities have a very large, or they have like a very small set of activities international athletes are allowed to do. Like it specifies that they must work on campus, they must provide direct student services, they must work for, I think it was 20 hours a week, don't quote me on that, or less. Um, so it just completely limits the NIL kind of thing that they can do. And, it just limits them to working in the same places as, other students who just want to make a quick buck. And you can't use your brand when you're working at a dining hall on campus whatsoever. So most athletes also, when I was talking to Kobe and a couple others, they don't really care, or at least that wasn't the reason. NIL wasn't the reason they came overseas to play a sport. It was to prove to themselves that they belonged at this college level and one of the highest levels of the sport in the world, really. Um, so that was all interesting. Like they didn't really think about it as much as maybe I would expect them to.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of topics that are undercovered, not undercover, but I guess kind of they are. This story about gymnastics, this is I mean, it's horrifying to think that we have student athletes that are in not only insufficient facilities, but dangerously insufficient. And so, Jared and Leah, help us understand where the idea came from for this story and what were the things that surprised you in your reporting.
Yeah, I received a tip for this story just through my sports editor account from a very concerned super fan of the program. She was a big donor and very connected with all the athletes and parents of these athletes, and had been trying to get the story out for a while. So she came to us. So we just kind of used her as a kind of a backbone for our reporting. She got us in with a bunch of program alumni, um, and we talked to all of them, see, what specifically about the facility wasn't sufficient, why it was dangerous, and what they thought could be done to help fix it. And we also really tried to emphasize how much UW Athletics was spending on other sports. They had just built a brand new $60 million basketball facility that opened a few months ago. Football and basketball NILs through the roof. But gymnastics, which is one of the most highly attended sports at UW, I think they average about 7,000 fans per meet, really can't get any funding for their program. So that's really what we tried to emphasize. I would say one of the biggest surprises, I guess it's actually not that surprising looking back on it, but was trying to talk to the athletic department and how much they really did not want to talk to us. Once we finally got one of their spokespeople on the phone, we had a 30-minute conversation with this guy, and he only went on the record for about 7 of those minutes. And even when he did, it was just basic PR, corporate speak that we could just kind of throw in a few quotes. But we really tried to emphasize both the fact of how insufficient the facility was and how much UW was spending on other sports.
Leah, have you seen has there been any change or, what kind of in terms of aftermath of this story, has anything changed from the perspective of donors or from the athletic department? What have you been seeing?
Um, as far as the athletic department, I haven't heard of any sort of increased funding towards the program, which is unfortunate, but it did get a lot of attention on social media, which I run the social media for the Daily, so it was kind of cool to keep track of that and see how a lot of kind of the bigger gymnastics news pages were noticing and commenting, and we had a lot of people who were parents of gymnasts from other schools saying, this is a problem at our school too. We need to put pressure on other athletics departments as well. So it kind of just brought more attention to the issue for fans. That's what I noticed. So that was really cool to see.
That's wonderful. Well, we have some questions that are coming in. I do want to remind everyone that the Q&A is open and we would love to hear from you. And Wayne, we're going to transition to these questions, but before we do, I wanted to get your take on, just your impressions as you're hearing kind of these stories. What do you think that other student journalists can learn from, the thought process that these reporters have shown, their responsiveness to getting a tip like this and being able to pursue it, coming up against uncooperative athletic departments, which I'm sure is more the norm. What are some of the things that you'd like people to think about?
Well, I think the great thing is if you listen to these students speak, that a lot of their stories stem from curiosity. You might get a tip, but you are curious and you start asking questions, and you don't just accept the easy answer. I think, and these things that we talk about, they all sound very simple and obvious, but they're challenging to do in practice. It's challenging to get a university spokesperson and you get on the phone for 30 minutes and they were saying 23 of it is off the record, right? And they can, be intimidating and they can threaten your credential there's just different things that it's hard to do. And I think, I find that we really need to push our student journalists to be much like you guys are, in pursuing these things that universities want hidden. And I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is follow your curiosity. Don't be intimidated. And another sort of obvious cliched thing is to believe in yourself as a reporter. I have students that I will talk to about asking certain questions, pursuing certain things like, ooh, like, I don't know if I can ask that. Like, no, you can. Like, they owe you answers. And so I commend this group for asking the right questions, for, doubling down when they're not getting the information they requested. I just think that, going down this road in and of itself is to be commended, and is a big step in where we need to keep going.
Absolutely. Well, let's get to some questions here. Donna has a couple questions. First for Nathan. She's asking, did you think about interviewing athletic directors and just asking the question, how did you split up the distribution of your new revenue pool money this year? NIL with promotional obligation versus straight cash revenue share, and what percentage went to each sport?
We did send out we did try to get in touch with and send out detailed questions to all the athletic departments and athletic directors of the schools that we were requesting information from, and almost all of them did not reply ever. So it's just kind of, we ran into that same kind of wall, and I was able to get, like Jared, I got a spokesperson on the phone from Indiana, and he provided kind of baseline answers to the questions that we sent. And that was, I believe, the only time we were ever able to speak with any of them.
Jen, what's your suggestion for when something like that happens, when you get stonewalled by the people who have information that you need? Is there any way around that? What would you suggest to your students that they do?
Couple of things. The first one is, well, to sort of go off what Wayne was saying, like, trust your gut. If something still doesn't sound right, even if you get a general explanation, and they tell you, oh, there's no story here, there's nothing to see here. Like, if your gut says there's something there and you feel like you're being lied to, keep asking questions. Don't necessarily start at the top. Sometimes start with an assistant coach. Maybe start with someone who's left the program, like as a former coach or a former player. Like, find people who can sort of point you in the right direction of people that might be able to give you more information. That's usually, when I was on beats for a long time, it was making connections with people who were not the people that usually talk to the media. And it was trying to get them to answer questions, even if it's just to say, off the record, you might want to check with this person. Generally, those people get you somewhere else that you need to go. And I know I keep bringing up Kentucky, but we have a situation here where our athletic director of 24 years, longest tenured guy in the business, is retiring in July. And they inserted something into his contract where he gets $900,000 a year job on the academic side now, running some kind of sports workforce group. And just writing what like, if you have people stonewalling you, writing that you're being stonewalled can always lead to more people either being outraged enough to demand change or ask more questions, or it can lead to people actually answering your questions because they're seeing that there's this outcry. So, when this thing happened with UK's athletic director, some people started chiming in, like on sports talk radio. Some people started chiming in the alumni and the booster groups. And what I found was, like, a lot of people had questions about this deal that nobody knew anything about. And just putting out there, and the athletic department's response, the athletic director's response was, we don't need to respond to just a couple of knuckleheads in the media. And, some people might just be like, well, I guess he's right, but no, like, you be the most difficult, complicated knucklehead that guy's ever dealt with. Like, that is my response to those sorts of things.
Absolutely.
I would add one thing to that, and I think Jen makes an awesome point about not always going to the obvious people. With there being so many transfers and the portal and all that now, there's so many people that you can reach out to who are leaving a university, and even if 90% of that is off the record. Hey, I saw that you left. I just wanted to touch base and see if you had any issues at Iowa or at Ohio State or Kentucky, anything we should be aware of. That's it, right? Like even making those phone calls or those text messages or DMs or whatever on everyone who leaves can lead you to incredible places. And you're just doing your due diligence. I know, several years ago, if you guys remember, there was an issue at the University of Iowa where there was allegations that the coaching staff of the football team wasn't treating African American athletes fairly. And I remember the beat writers that covered the team kicking themselves and saying, I wish every year when 4 or 5 guys or 6 guys or whatever would have transferred, I would have reached out to all of them and said, what were your experiences? And we would have known, at least from their perspectives, this was going on. So you have that element. You have a far greater involvement with boosters. You have collectives. The spokespeople don't want to speak, but there are so many more people involved today in this college sports environment. It's really hard for them to all keep everyone quiet.
True that. Well, Donna has another question. This one's for you, Jacob. She's asking about under the $20.5 million revenue cap, providing revenue shares to athletes that's straight cash as opposed to NIL. And she's curious if you were able to talk with your athletic director about that and maybe what the response was.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Donna. And I think I'll echo Nathan in that this story was very hard to get comments from Mizzou athletics personnel, including Laird Veach, the athletic director. I did reach out to him multiple times for comment, but wasn't able to talk to him or the compliance officers there. But what I will say about that is from multiple sources, I learned that it's a very muddy environment for international athletes. You're not always going to get punished for taking some NIL dollars, but according to the immigration attorney, every single dollar that you do take just increases your risk of penalties that are being brought against you. And he was saying, yeah, even if you just get this money from the university without really working for it, like, the $20.5 million salary cap that has been implemented with the House versus NCAA settlement, the courts could say, well, you're not a student anymore. You're coming over from a country to work here, which is basically your work as an athlete at the university, and they can penalize you. There's a really great resource that the University of Oregon actually put out just talking about the rules that international student athletes face, which was a big resource for me in this story as well. And they basically say that the most common visa is the F1, obviously the student visa. And under the student visa, the requirements that I was talking about previously, the where you can work, how many hours you can make, a lot of those would probably be violated by just receiving like a large, even not a large, just a cash grant from the university and not doing any quote unquote work, even though they are working as an athlete or a student athlete on campus. So that's one of the things I wish I could have done a little bit more reporting on, was getting Mizzou's comment on what they thought about it. But from what I could find, there weren't any international athletes at Mizzou that were actually making NIL money. But again, those records are very difficult to come by, if not impossible at times.
Absolutely. We have a
Hey,
couple
Nicole.
questions. Oh, please go ahead, Jen.
I wanted to commend Jared and Leah because when he said I got a tip, to the sports editor, like I think a lot of sports editors are sort of you get lots of tips all the time as a reporter and as an editor, and sometimes you chase them and they go nowhere, and sometimes they go somewhere. But the fact that it had to do with a sport that maybe wasn't one of the predominant sports on your campus, that involved female athletes, like I really appreciated that you guys chased this, even though you weren't sure that the payoff was going to be there, or that people would read it, or that people would care about it. Like, there are stories of athletes all over every campus that need to be told, and they don't have to be a football player. They don't have to be a men's basketball player. And I really, when he said that, I thought, how many times did they send that message to another reporter the super fan. How many times did she send that message to other reporters and they just went, so I really appreciated that about that story. And I wanted to make sure I said that at some point during this.
Well,
Yeah,
and it's the
on that.
perfect segue, if I could, Jared, just real fast. Donna was asking, and maybe you could group this in with your answer about the gymnasts and the parents that maybe you spoke with, kind of what their engagement was in terms of helping you understand this story. And was there any concern from them about retaliation that they might face?
Yeah, so on the first note, with the super fan, she had definitely talked to the athletic department or tried to talk to the athletic department about this many times because when we talked to the athletic department, they brought her up and tried to make her seem like she was completely unreliable. And we're also questioning all of our other sources, and tried to make sure that we like knew what we were doing in quotes. So they really kind of didn't really want to talk to us with parents and family. So they were very hesitant to talk to us, especially because the story was coming out right before their season was about to start. I think their first match was like 2 days after we published the story. So we mostly just relied on this super fan who was very connected to the current students and on the program alumni who graduated. I think most of them, I think, graduated in the early 2020s from the program. We took, we got photos of the facility from people who are currently on the team who asked to remain anonymous. And we had reached out to coaches, both past and present, who also did not want to talk to us about it. But we also know that they kind of all knew that this story was coming out and that they all supported what it was trying to do. But because they were currently on the team and their season was about to start, they didn't want to talk to us on the record about the issue.
Did you guys do any kind of FOIA of your athletic department to see if people had lodged complaints, formal complaints, written complaints about those things? I don't
We,
remember seeing that in the story. I couldn't remember.
we didn't do an official request, but we do know that this super fan has been bugging the athletic department about this for many, many, many years.
I just
And,
assume she's
and
not the only one. And it
yeah,
might be worth sort of investigating what they knew and when they knew it and if they'd taken any action afterward.
yeah,
I mean, it is hard to imagine that a parent didn't at some point. I mean, if thought my kid was doing something that, in space that was not safe for them, that would be the first thing that I would be reporting.
Yeah, there's like a section of the story that we ended up cutting out because of our professor's recommendation that we still need to do records requests to follow up on. We wanted to talk to the previous coach and a previous athlete who transferred out, and the information we had gotten from some of the alumni about kind of their departure wasn't really fully reliable enough before we got those records. So we're still working on that part of the story and hopefully can follow up on that soon.
Cool.
Absolutely. Well, I think, Jacob, you kind of hinted at legal elements to this, and we actually have two questions that come in from Sanford about whether student reporters consult university lawyers or they're walled off from seeking advice, and how much training student reporters get in the areas of law relevant to their work in terms of, copyright and free speech. And I want to give a plug for the Student Press Law Center, which Ohio State seems to have on speed dial. We contact them on a consistent basis, and also Marquette has an amazing sports law program that's headed by someone named Matt Mitten, an Ohio State alum who's on the Sports and Society Initiative Board, who we often consult with. So I know from an Ohio State perspective, we are constantly seeking, legal structure because we don't go through the university to do that per se. And I'm curious, all of you, did you have legal questions that you needed to get answered? Did you feel like you were trained in how to do that? And where did you go to get resources? Maybe Jacob, you could start.
Yeah, I can answer that, at least for Missouri, and thanks, Sanford, for the questions. So, like the first one about the university lawyers, I have had a lot of success talking to Mizzou law professors who are obviously also lawyers themselves. I've talked to lawyers that cover free speech issues. I've talked to lawyers that cover antitrust issues. Of course, antitrust has been a big thing in like the whole NIL and college sports debate. For this story, I talked to the New York-based lawyer because he had more experience covering the international athletes and he dealt with a lot of the issues related to that. But yes, and just like Ohio State, I think Missouri is, or at least the University of Missouri, does a lot with the Student Press Association as well. And I'm actually, for the second question, currently taking a class with Professor Jared Schroeder, who is super knowledgeable on pretty much all things First Amendment, like libel, stuff like that, learning about all the key cases. So we don't face any legal issues for reporting our stories, for investigating different topics. And I think the University of Missouri does a great job in helping their student journalists be aware of those issues and helping them really structure their stories in a way that they're not going to get in legal trouble for them.
I really want to hear the IDS answer this question.
Yes.
Well, yes, as I'm sure some of you know, we have had our dealings with the Student Press Law Center this past year. Uh, for this specific story, I don't believe we had any specific legal questions we needed answered, and didn't. We did. Mia did speak with a lawyer from the University of Illinois, a professor. I don't think it was necessarily that big of an issue for this story. I've had a lot more experience talking with lawyers, and I've talked to some in Indiana, some that have pointed me to other lawyers across the country somewhere that have more knowledgeable at whatever I'm asking them about. And I know we have great resources for that, and I've been lucky enough to get some really great uh, sources on that and some great insight from people who know a lot more about the legal system than I do.
And for anyone who's not aware, Indiana faced the firing of their student media director, Jim Rodenbush. I believe Mia was involved in the battle in that regard. And that's what you consulted with the Student Press Law Center about basically censorship of your paper by the administration.
Yes, Mia is one of our co-editors in chief for this year, so she has been at the forefront of that fighting for us.
And we appreciate her fight. Um, how about Jared and Leah? Did you have any legal issues that you encountered?
We didn't have any legal issues.
Okay. Um, Another question that Sanford had that I think kind of dovetails into this is the relationship between your universities and the student-run newspaper. He's mentioning that he served on the board of the Daily Collegian at Penn State, and the newspaper had I'm putting in quotes, quasi-independence. The university didn't interfere with what the newspaper published or how it handled its finances, but it did own the building in which the newspaper offices were located. What is the relationship between your different publications and the university as a whole? And did that impact your reporting at all? Jacob, you want to start us?
I don't think I'm the most qualified here to talk on this. The Columbia Missourian that I work for is not technically a student run, although it is student staffed. So I think I'll leave that up to the other panelists to talk a little bit more on it.
Leah, you want to take this? Thank you, Jacob.
Oh, sorry, can you repeat the question? I think I missed part of it.
He was asking about the relationship between the administration and your publication, and in terms of how much oversight that the university itself might have or the department that it might operate under.
Yeah, so we're independent as a newspaper, which has been really great because, especially in our news section, we tend to put a lot of pressure on administration with the budget and current protests that happen on our campus a lot. So we have a lot of experience of putting pressure on the administration. So they're kind of familiar with us at this point and expect it from us. So I don't think it necessarily came as a surprise to them that we were putting this pressure on them. And there's not really, they can't stop us from publishing anything that we do find, which is really helpful in student media to not have that oversight from the direct university.
Nathan, I saved you for last because I think we have a part answer. So the fact that maybe you get a little bit more interference than you're expecting or that some of the others might.
Yeah, so our relationship is not so great with the university right now. But that said, we're still fully independent and there's no oversight of any kind about any kind of content decisions or the things that we publish. The issue that we faced back in November was, or October, excuse me, which was our advisor, Jim Rodenbush, being fired for refusing to censor the paper uh, back last fall. And I think an important clarification there is that it wasn't any sort of one story thing. It was about them not wanting us to publish news in our publication that was set for that date and already approved in that paper to go alongside with one of our special publications. And the expectation is that we always publish news in our newspaper. So that was kind of a little bit of what that battle was. And I don't believe that that's done yet. So to say the least, our relationship isn't the greatest, although of course we maintain full student-run content in all ways.
Absolutely.
Here at the University of Kentucky, the student newspaper has actually sued, the university has sued the student newspaper twice now over records requests and their failure to comply. The Kernel is a independent student newspaper. I was the editor of it way back in the day. Um, and it's been interesting, like both times the student newspaper has won those suits and UK's ended up having to pay to make that happen. So I guess much like the IDS and what you guys are dealing with, like push back as much as you can. I'm a university employee now, but in every sports journalism class, I'm like, the university is lying to you. You need to ask them these questions. There are these people that seem important and they are important, and we need to hold them to account. Like so, um, don't be afraid to file requests multiple times. Don't be afraid to ask hard questions of PR people whose job it is to protect the people. Like, I just think that's super important to remember for regular journalists and for student journalists too.
Well, I'm going to echo that Ohio State has also been sued twice by the Lantern in the last couple of years, including an establishment of state law called the Sutton Law, because our editor-in-chief, who was previously our sports editor, sued over a public record, a redacted name on a sexual assault that was deemed to be an academic record and protected under FERPA. And we were grateful that the state agreed, the court system agreed that sexual assault is not indeed an academic record. And we were able to get the name of of a football player that was involved in that at the time. So yeah, I can't echo enough what Jen just said about pushing and pushing and pushing and we know that you guys are heading in that direction. And for anyone else who might be listening, to support student journalists the same way that we support journalism at all levels, to make sure that they hold powerful people accountable. Jared and Leah, the question comes from Nick about Iowa State recently cutting their gymnastics program. And Nick's curious how you see that affecting your story and any ramifications, either good or bad, from your reporting, and if you see the recent events at Iowa State magnifying your story even more.
Yeah, I definitely think it certainly magnifies the story more. I think a lot of the story involves funding for the program, and obviously Iowa State's is very similar. I also think it connects to a much bigger story about funding for Olympic sports at major universities as a whole, which I know are being cut and underfunded left and right. So the part of the question was,
Just in terms of how it might be affecting your story, or how you think you had an impact on their circumstances.
yeah, I think just based on the current attendance numbers and how big gymnastics is in the state of Washington, I don't see it having a massive, like I don't really see the university cutting the program anytime soon. But and I think the athletic department has maintained a stance that they are very committed to trying to fund Olympic sports. But it certainly is kind of just a concerning pattern around the country that especially gymnastics programs and swimming programs, field hockey programs just keep being cut.
Most definitely. And we did, talk with you a little bit about the aftermath of your stories, and we're curious. Wayne's has brought up behind the scenes here. What has been the aftermath of the other stories that we're talking about here? Nathan, have you seen any changes, or what's happened in terms of follow-ups that you might be approaching as it relates to your story?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that was kind of a result of our unfortunate battle with the university last semester was that stories like this kind of flew under the radar as we were kind of had other things that were more pressing at the time and receiving more coverage. So in terms of this getting talked about, we didn't see a whole lot of it on our end, although of course, throughout the year, throughout the college sports seasons, there's always constant changes proposed. I think it was just yesterday, the Big Ten was talking about trying to kind of mimic some of the NBA's bird rights system and expand past the house salary cap to retain players. So there's all sorts of different proposed rule changes, updates that are constantly being thrown out there. And there's, as we kind of search for some sort of clarity on how this is going to go.
How about you, Jacob?
Yeah, I am keeping up with the lawsuits, especially last year Pose, that's still working its way through the legal system right now, but there hasn't been any change in that legal landscape so far. I heard from a few athletes that responded to me with things like how they were being able to make money like back home or not via on-campus positions. I really got no response from the university itself, and I don't believe that's going to be something that's coming. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in keeping at least somewhat of a pulse on this international athletes issue. But there, I mean, there's just so many different NIL, I don't know if you want to call them inequities or issues that our athletes are facing right now. And I don't think a lot of people know the answers. I don't know the answers at all. So it's going to be an interesting next year, next 2 years to see where this ends up going. If we're going to get collective bargaining, if we're going to get some level of certainty around the next step in college athletics.
Wayne, I'm curious, one thing that really is striking me is the importance of these topics. And, we only identified 3 articles that we were able to honor here. But there's so many topics that relates to athletics and so few reporters, I think, covering them, and so many sports departments, Washington Post being decimated. How do we kind of keep moving forward in such a meaningful space with the resources that we have, and making sure that these people who are coming out of the journalism programs are ready to kind of do the heavy lifting, even though they may not have the spaces that recognize the need for such a heavy lift?
Well, I think while we might not have the quantity of stellar people that are still in newsrooms across the country, I think what's so important is to do uh, great quality of work that transcends, work that breaks through. Um, Quality over quantity, honestly. I look, I look. I hate to even mention his name, but I look at like Pat McAfee, right, and like taking shots at sports writers and how sports writers are all, whatever basement dwellers who are frustrated and whatever, all the shots he takes. Um, and I think about that. I'm like, what is he talking about? Well, he's talking about aggregators and that line of sports reporting where people are repurposing other people's work, which I totally understand gets done all the time today. But I think true quality journalism that reveals these inadequacies, that reveals what's going on behind the scenes, that's what people still want to read, is still important, and that's what we need to do. If I'm running a newsroom today, I mean, truthfully, I would take resources probably away from like your typical daily coverage. And I would build the best enterprise investigative team that I could to go and pursue these types of stories that will transcend whether you're in Philadelphia or Las Cruces, New Mexico, or you're writing for The Athletic. These types of pieces, I think, are what's so important in this sort of landscape we have today. I can't stress that enough, and that's why I love that you guys are doing this work. And I in our little side chat here, I said to Nicole, like, I encourage all of you to keep doing this and encouraging your peers to do the same.
Ben,
I
what do you
tell
think about it?
students, I tell students constantly that everybody goes to their student newspaper to go and cover the big game, to go and talk to the important athletes on their campus, to feel important, to gain a Twitter following or X following or whatever it might, a Instagram, TikTok following. But the things that get you the big boy and big girl jobs in the world are having pieces like this to put in a portfolio before you leave college. And your ability, all of you can put, I am an award-winning journalist, in your LinkedIn or your bios or wherever it is right now that your resumes because of this, but also your ability to talk about being able to do this kind of reporting and all the steps that you took us through in the whole panel conversation is really important when you get in front of an editor who wants to know what you can do for them to make their paper better, to make their news station better, to make whatever their organization is better. And the fact that you've already done these things, that this isn't some, that what FOIA is, how to use it, how to ask hard questions to important people, like those set you aside from the person that just wants to sit on press row and feel important. And you maybe didn't get into journalism initially to do this kind of reporting, but now that you have a taste of it, I hope you take this and you run with it.
Absolutely. Uh, This is a little bit off the topic of these stories that we've been talking about, but there are some pretty substantial changes afoot in journalism, or people trying to make these changes. And one of them, of course, is AI. And the Cleveland.com editor recently came out and said that he's not going to be hiring writers anymore, that he wants to hire people who can report and do interviews, and then those people will bring their materials back and AI will create the stories from them. And so I was curious, as people who are entering into the journalism space, if you're aware of those comments, and now that I've made you aware of them, what your thoughts are about that as a policy of an institution that comes from some respect. And I'm certainly seeing it, and I want to talk to Wayne and Jen about what you're seeing about people using AI in that manner. But I am curious how you guys feel about a comment like that. Maybe Leah, could you start?
Yeah, I think it's something that definitely concerns me. I'm very grateful that our paper is very anti-AI and very clear about that. Um, but I think AI reporting and writing from AI will never be able to get the depth of the story like a person can, because you don't have that face-to-face contact. You're not sitting with the people learning from them. You're not really hearing their stories. And AI just can't do that the same way that a person can. So,
He's actually
um,
saying, I want people to do that, but then I don't want them to do the writing. I think that
yeah.
the AI
And
can do the writing well.
yeah, I think that, but I don't think AI is good at translating those experiences into good writing that can convey what it feels like to talk to that person and hear that story in the same way that the person sitting there can write it. So that's, I guess, my take on it, is that it's just it won't be able to get the same depth and humanity in the article, and especially in stories like these that I think they need to have.
I hear you. What about you, Nathan?
Yeah, I think Leah put it really well. I very much agree. Not something AI is not something that I am a big fan of. It's not something I would want to use in any sort of writing or coverage that I do. Uh, hear those comments from you said it was Cleveland.com. It's not very certainly disappointing to hear because people in college right now, I'm sure Leah and Jacob and Jared agree. It's not something that we're particularly excited to hear that potential future employers in the industry we're looking to get into or looking to replace us before we even get there. So it's not, I like I said, I think Leah put it very well. I agree that AI, maybe they can kind of spit out the information that we gather, but they're not going to get across the why of what we're doing, and they're not going to be able to pick up from something that AI wrote like Leah said, the depth of the story and what really matters about it. I think that's what's important about keeping people writing.
Jacob or Jared?
Nicole,
Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah.
Nicole,
Sorry.
I think the Cleveland.com guy like took it a little too far, probably for most journalists' comfort. But I do think that a lot of student newspapers, including the one at our place, is really just like no AI, X zero, But we have somebody on our staff who was on our journalism staff that was a McClatchy VP who developed all the AI strategies and ethics and all these other things. And his idea is we should be using AI to do some sorts of reporting. It makes us better reporters if we're using it properly. Like I think about Nathan's story, and I think there's a ton of documents out there that you can feed into AI and it can give you reports. It can tell you what it knows. I think when we're looking at like athletic budgets, it can tell us some really important, interesting details. I think when we're looking at like athletic boards or board of trustees meetings, it can give you the key talking points so that you can make sure that you're seeing ones from all across the Big Ten or all across the SEC. Like I think that there are a lot of tools that all of us, including student journalists, need to use AI and understand how to use it to be really good journalists. But I agree with Leah and with Nathan that it takes away sort of the depth that good reporting can do. But I do think we should figure out how to use it as a tool. I think that it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And it shouldn't replace people, but people should learn. I think the best journalists in the future are the ones who are going to learn to use it properly, ethically, and do amazing stuff with it, especially data reporting and some of the things like the IDS students did.
Yeah, Jen, I actually completely agree with you right there. I think Cleveland.com kind of has it backwards almost because I haven't read almost anything that I later found out like is AI that actually like sounds like a human. It's not there yet. Maybe it will get there eventually, but that's a story for another day. But I mean, I've used AI to like draft public records requests. I'm working on a story right now that's analyzing MFRS, the athletic budget reports for every SEC school that I can find, and kind of used AI to write copies of those requests for every different state. It just cuts down on that time like so much. And finding like sources too. I mean, it can be helpful there, finding researchers, finding experts on topics. But like, I don't know, I came into Missouri from high school as a guy who really enjoyed the writing process, not so much the reporting process. And I kind of had to learn how to do that, develop those chops a little bit, especially over the last 2 years. And using AI for writing would just be a blow to the heart for me, especially. And I assume all of you guys as well. So that really does disappoint me.
I would totally echo what Jen said. I think there's a great division in academia of get it out of here, never, never go away. It's evil. It's going to take all our jobs. And the others who are more open to it. I know, I took a group of students to the Big Ten Network for a tour in like December, and we met with one of their VPs, and he was saying that every job interview they have now, they ask a candidate, how have they used AI to make themselves more efficient and help their work?
Mhm.
And so when I heard that, I was okay, like, we have to be open to this. And if we're doing this the right way, just what Jen said, we are showing our students how to use this effectively to make them more efficient, to help them ask better questions, to help them process information. What I tell my students is that AI is not the enemy. AI is in the era that we worked in newsrooms. AI is the buddy is sitting at the desk next to you, and you're like, hey, I've got 15 minutes with Caleb Williams in an hour. What are some questions you think I could ask? I have done this on stories I've worked on, and I will tell you that if it gives me 10 questions, nine of them might be garbage, but one is really good. And of those nine that are garbage, it might spring about two or three ideas that I have. When you think of it in terms of collaborating, that's when it works. Certainly, it cannot write. But I tell the students as well, like, look, when my daughter played travel softball, the moment her game was over and they stopped scoring it on Game Changer, AI had a game story on the app immediately, right? It's done, it's over, it's finished. What it doesn't have is the emotion, it doesn't have the why, it doesn't have any depth to what happened. It just processes the information. AI will never, ever be able to report great or replace great reporting. It can't. It's not capable of that. It can't humanize and ask the questions that we go as journalists and ask. Will it eventually be able to help us writing? Probably. I think probably it will. Will it help us process information? Absolutely. So I think we're doing ourselves a disservice if we're just like put up the Heisman Trophy, stiff arm, get away from us. I think you got to be open to it because, just like Jen said, I think the ones who figure out how to use it the best are going to be the most successful journalists moving forward.
I agree with you. I want to make sure, Jared, you had a chance to weigh in on this topic.
Yeah, I understand the importance of trying to, develop these tools to work well for journalism. I just think where it's at currently, I don't put any trust in it, knowing that
Nor should you.
It's been known to hallucinate things and make things up. And like, I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, asking it to analyze a bunch of documents that I'm then going to publish under my name. I wouldn't want it to do that. And I also just think at this point in time, like with the comments from the Cleveland guy, it's incredibly, incredibly dangerous for the field and especially as a young journalist. So I get the importance of trying to use it. And I think it can get to that point, but where it's at right now, I would pretty much never use it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with
You
Wayne.
can use it as like
a collaborator. I mean, I I talk to it constantly and bounce
Yeah.
ideas off it. And yeah, I mean, I hear what you guys are saying. Ohio State, full disclosure, is we have been charged to make our students bilingual in AI. So it is an integral part of our education across all levels, from the very first freshman classes that we offer all the way through the majority of majors at this point, and it's something that we're going to be continuing with. I totally recognize what you're saying, Jared, about the challenges that it presents, the dangers, and I too, value too much the ability to craft stories and not leave them to something non-human to do that. But I'm also hearing what Wayne says, and in terms of public records requests, synthesizing some elements of data, kind of making my life more streamlined so that it gives me more time to do the things that I do well, which is writing and reporting. That's where it's coming most in handy for me. I did want to kind of shift, as there's so many journalism evolutions that are coming. Another I read recently, I may have been on part, I'm not sure where it was, but it talked about the need to stop teaching journalism conventionally, and that instead of teaching people to write for publications, that we should be teaching newsletters. I'm almost positive it was it may have been Pointer, or anyway, the idea is that we should be teaching newsletters creation as opposed to writing for a publication, which there's a lot of ethics that go into creating a document that doesn't necessarily have editors always involved in it, and has more opinion than it does straight factual reporting. And I'm curious, Wayne, what would be your response to incorporating something like that into your academic structure there at Iowa, and our student friends? How would you feel about it being built into your programs?
I think about this a lot, Nicole, in that, like, I think we need to do a better job at educating our students in the idea of the business side of things, right? Like the idea that how you can monetize this for yourself and not need um, Jeff Bezos to fund it for you and then change his mind, right? Having said that, boy, does that put a lot of pressure on educating students masterfully, right? Because why is the New York Times the New York Times? The New York Times is what it is because of the system of checks and balances that it has, that even they with their system make mistakes and have failures, right? But there is a structure and an organization and a foundation with which stories go through before they are published. And so, it scares me to think of you know, people having one-off newsletters that don't go through that process. The other thing that concerns me with that idea is, how does that newsletter get traction? Right? Well, the way you get traction today is either this work that we're talking about on this podcast, this investigative enterprise work, or it's being very opinionated and very edgy, right? And not going right down the middle of the fairway. And so that would concern me. In that I feel like we need less heavily opinionated journalism than more these days. So look, like I do think it's a little bit unfair at times that we help build young journalists to then go work for corporations that eventually, are going to kick them to the curb. Like I tell people, like I worked at ESPN for 23 years. I knew that day was coming someday. Eventually it did. Okay. Well, what do we do to help you pivot when that happens? What do we do where you can work for a startup or another place where you can use those tools? Maybe you're the one who runs the business and understands how the business works and doesn't need a gazillionaire to change his mind. It's a complicated topic.
I think we have.
So
Did you want
go
me to
ahead.
go? I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I think we have to take so when I started in journalism in 99 or whatever year that was, I knew that I was always going to have readers. I knew that I just had to write my story, send it to an editor. It would show up on somebody's porch the next morning. I mean, it's this antiquated dinosaur kind of thing now, but it was just about good storytelling. by the time I was done in sports journalism, I was having to figure out how to get eyes on my own stuff. And I think we're doing students a disservice if we're not getting them to think about the bigger issues in journalism, the bigger business issues in storytelling. So I think that we have to train multimedia journalists from the start of journalism school to the end. And I think people will find the thing that they're really good at. If it's newsletter writing, you'll have a job. If it's newspaper writing, you'll have a job. Like, if it's doing really excellent podcasts that draw in readers and viewers and listeners, you can find a job. Like it's now being able to tell a story across a multitude of platforms well. Um, and not every one of them you're going to be the best at, but maybe exploring writing, being able to tell this one story in 6 different ways makes you more marketable. It makes you more likely to get more people, more eyes, more ears on your stuff. So I just think it's incredibly important that we don't just fixate on I'm this path or I'm this path or I'm this path, but sort of dabble in all the paths, because you might find out that being a good storyteller goes across every form and every format. And I think that that's important. I think most journalism students get into it because they want to tell good stories. I think we have to teach them how to tell good stories that keep them employed in different ways.
And we have Stanford's asking, he's kind of throwing podcasting into this mix here. And so, I'm curious what you guys are thinking, those of you who are in the student journalism trenches. Jacob, maybe you could start for us. What are the other pathways that you're seeing are important to open up? How are you disseminating your content? How do you feel about this kind of evolution away from conventional legacy media into these different spaces?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that we live in the attention economy. I mean, that's been a pretty hot topic over the last few years. And the Columbia Missourian is definitely taking advantage of both podcasts and newsletters. I know the football and men's basketball and women's basketball beat writers have their own podcasts that they produce once a week that go out to a pretty hefty audience, actually. I also work for a publication, Missouri Business Alert, covering business news. We do a newsletter and we do a podcast as well. So it's another Missouri School of Journalism sponsored outlet. And the numbers that these things get are pretty impressive, actually, and drive coverage back to the main site. So I think outlets and journalists themselves would be foolish to not at least be open to the idea of podcasting, of newsletter, of more short form content, even though I know we go and think, oh, the best stories are these long pieces, the in-depth pieces. I think there's a way that they can be broken down into visual, audio, these mediums that are maybe more popular than basic print journalism right now. And just like AI, I think that's the way the industry is moving, and we should be ready to attack it that way.
I think it's incredibly interesting if you were to ask all of these students, and maybe I am asking all of you, but how do you turn this giant story that you worked on for like months at a time? How do you turn it into a TikTok that leads it back to the main story? You know what I mean? Like, think about how you make this interesting to someone in 140 characters, or how do I make this interesting to someone in a vertical video? Like, so I just think that's an incredibly interesting way. You almost have to think about your brand now as a journalist, and that was never something I had to think about in my early years as a journalist. But like, how can you take this giant thing that you worked on forever and make it dumb enough to get readers back to it? It's just sort of a weird phenomenon. But have you considered that about any of your stories? Like, how do I take this monster thing and make it quick and easy and interesting to the average person?
I think you can pull the best parts or the most interesting findings from those stories. I've had the issue of trying to share these stories via X, my account, and like you only get so many characters, and it's like, how do you determine what and what not is important in the story? I don't even have an answer to that question. I haven't really done a lot of the short form TikTok stuff yet, but I know it's coming, so not excited about it, but love the rest of you guys to kind of chime in on that.
Yeah,
Leah, you're in charge of social media. Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll
I'm
get
just
Nathan first and then Leah.
like Jacob. I'm not super enthusiastic about the social media side of things right now, though it's of course important. I'm glad, Jen, you mentioned multimedia journalists. I feel like every professor I've ever had at the media school has really kind of harped on that all day long, every class. You have to be ready to enter the industry. You have to maximize what you can provide and really know how to attack things from all angles. And whether that's digital storytelling, written storytelling, videos, and I think in terms of trying to turn some of our more long form stories like these into interesting social media content, I'd probably lean into uh, some of trying to make it more of an interesting visually with some kind of data visualizations of all the stuff that we've collected to kind of make that more compact and easy for people to see.
AI can do that for you, by the way.
I was just gonna say,
Hang on, my
Full
son's a
circle.
graphic designer, so what's
Oh, sorry.
Leah,
you
I'm
know,
sorry, what were you gonna say?
Jen, you're so spot on with all this. I think, like this morning I saw, I think it was on Instagram Reels, Front Office Sports, had a carousel of 3 or 4 things of here's what you need to know about the new WNBA deal, right? And like 15 years ago, that would have been a 1,000-word story in the paper. And today, there's an editor or there's a group of people, whatever, that said, okay, what are the most important parts of this? That's editorial judgment. And then how do we write this in the reel? That is writing. Like we all know, all you guys sound like you love writing. It is far more difficult to write a 400-word jam-packed story than it is a 1,000-word story when you can stretch your legs out, right? So like, okay, making those decisions, writing those reels, picking the right words, like that's a way to get these stories into those audiences. And the reality is, when I sit in my classrooms, and none of you I am accusing of being this way, and I far doubt that you are, but many students don't read. And so we're sitting there trying to teach them the craft of writing when they don't read. And that's hard. And I think writing is incredibly important. It's been my passion my entire life. But I think I just keep saying exactly what Jen said. But I echo this idea that you have to be able to do this in multiple mediums, and we're seeing it now done well in those places.
Leah, you were gonna.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm in charge of all of our social media and newsletters for the daily. So kind of my whole job is thinking about how do we get people to engage with every kind of article that we put out, especially our own work. And the way I kind of have learned to think about it is like balancing kind of marketing and public service. What point is going to get people onto our website to read the whole thing, but also what's the most important that people need to know and have like at the most accessible point on their feed. So I think that's how I think about it. And kind of the thought process I go into when I'm posting articles like on our Instagram. And I found that social media is just a growing part of our publication. And I think it's really important that it's incorporated into journalism curriculums. I know at our school, our journalism curriculum is very focused on print writing journalism. I would love to see more multimedia work go into that because I think what I'm hearing consistently from people in the industry right now is that they want journalists that can kind of do it all, that can do the short form reel, that can do the Instagram post, and can write the good story. So, yeah, I definitely think it's super important that that goes into journalism as well.
Absolutely. And this idea of being read is such a key part of what we do. And I think that's what we're all trying to figure out is how do we get people to consume that which we spend so much time working on and that really is so important, like the stories that we've been talking about today. And I'm curious, what advice do you have for people? And I'd love for Jared to start. What advice do you have for student journalists that are out there that may want to tackle a story like yours, that want to be able to submit something to next year's contest, which we 100% want everyone to do? How do you get started on something like this, and where do ideas come from, and just what advice do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it was probably a bit different from our story because we were tipped, which definitely made our starting point very easy because it gave us not only the story but also a source to start off with. I would say if you don't have that, it's just about, I think we mentioned this before, it's just about looking, like knowing where to look and who to talk to. I mean, and everyone here goes to like a major Power Four conference, huge athletic school. There's 20 sports on your campus. There's so many athletes. There's so many coaches. There's so many parents. There's so many administrators. There's all these people who each have their own unique stories, and it's just about trying to talk to them and trying to find it, but also just knowing where to look. And when you're in it, just you know, do multiple rounds of interviews with the same people and know who is going to give you reliable information and who's not. Like, for example, if we're talking to program alumni who had to deal with these facilities, we know that they're going to give us reliable information, and the athletic department is probably not going to give us very reliable information. So it's about trying to find that balance as well.
Great advice. How about you, Jacob?
I think being well read does play a big role in this because if you're reading national news, state news, I think especially for us covering university topics, like what I do all the time is I'll take information that I get from a national and AP of front office sports about the business of college athletics and say, how is that impacting students here at the University of Missouri? Like, for example, I know the whole Charles Bediako situation with Alabama coming back to play college basketball and then not being allowed to after that. I was like, what athletes from Missouri would even be eligible for something like that? Just maybe not an investigative piece, but a story like that. But I think big investigations can come from reading and figuring out where the gaps are from the big publications as well that maybe they don't have the time to cover because they're covering things that happen every day that a student journalist might have more time to kind of dig through.
That's great advice. Nathan.
Yeah, I'd say try to cast a wide net, like Wayne said earlier. It's a lot of these stories just come from curiosity. If you read a story about something happening in Maine with athletics or sports, there's often something similar going on where you are. And I think an example of this that I've had was we had this was about a month ago, I think, on three published story about the NCAA and the lawsuits, the eligibility lawsuits that are ongoing, and how they're threatening to apply the rule of restitution to some of these schools. And so what we did was we know that one of the Indiana's football players has an ongoing lawsuit, and so we apply that national story and we focus it for our Indiana audience, and we come out with something that a lot of people really care about, which is for us was Indiana football because it was such a huge story this year. So I think being able to kind of focus some of the more national stories and apply it to your areas and your audience can really generate a lot of positive results.
Great idea. Leah?
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. I think for me, my biggest piece of advice is just collaborating with other people in your newsroom. I think that has been the most beneficial for me in this story, especially coming from someone who doesn't typically write for sports, and I hadn't done a large investigative piece before. So it was really helpful working with Jared, who had talked to the athletics department before and had these connections built up already. And then also talking to people like our news editor who had done larger investigative pieces, asking, what do you think about this? Where should we go from here? Can you look over this part of the story? I think that is really helpful for me, just kind of working together as a team and not really bearing the burden by yourself.
That sounds terrific. How about you, Jen? What's your advice here?
They mentioned localization, which I think is sort of where journalism should be headed and can be headed in the future. I mean, nobody used that term, but it's the idea of taking these bigger stories and making them hit home for the people that read them from your audiences. I mean, I 100% agree with that. But I think with stories like this, like just, part of being on a beat is hearing from people behind the scenes. Part of being on a beat is catching wind of something that's about to happen and then thinking about like, what are the bigger implications of this? I mean, I feel like with Jacob specifically, like he probably just heard something about this one athlete that had this big social media following and, how it sort of turned into this new thing. Like being international and whether or not she can monetize that. And I just, I think my best stories that I've written, the ones that have won awards, are just me like casually overhearing something and thinking, that would make an interesting story, or I'd love to follow up on that, or I want to ask more questions about that, just because I'm a nosy person and I want to know these things. And just encouraging student journalists to sort of chase that, all journalists, not just student journalists, but all journalists to sort of chase the thing that excites you, that you have a passion for, that you're interested in. Like, I mean, I think we're hearing that with Jacob, who I think was an economics major or something, or you did something with economics at some point, and finding a thing that really sort of moves you, and then writing about it. I mean, for me, it was a lot of women's issues, Title IX issues, things like that I didn't know a ton about when I left UK. But then I started covering women's sports and men's sports, and I started looking at, and I thought, there's some really interesting stuff here. There are really good stories to tell that nobody else is telling. And I think that helps you get a job. Like, I think being willing to do almost any, work any hours, anytime, and then being willing to tell stories that other people aren't willing to tell, finding your niche. But yeah, I think it's just sort of chasing that passion and chasing that curiosity.
That's great advice. We only have just a few minutes left. I think this is kind of a great way to end it from Donna. She's asking our student friends, what sports story would you like to write? And maybe one that you don't think that you can yet, but it's on your mind.
It's a great question.
Don't make me pick someone. Nathan.
Wow. I've always been interested in some of the not as popular sports, kind of similar to the great work that Jared and Leah did. I've been interested in some of the stuff relating to how, specifically with the Indiana swim program. I want to learn a lot more of the stories of the athletes that we don't hear as much about, and I want to do some digging and figure out some of the most interesting people that we should know that we don't with
Love
Indiana
that.
athletics.
Jared?
My dad was a swimmer in Indiana. They have lots of stories.
They do. Jared?
Yeah, I'm really hoping this summer to get a chance to cover some of the World Cup. I also have just a interest in geography, and I think kind of people from all over the world and all these different cultures coming to kind of one place, all kind of through the love of sport, is something that's really fascinating. But I also don't quite have as much soccer knowledge as I do with other sports, which would be a challenge. But that would definitely be a challenge that I'd be really wanting to try to tackle this summer.
100%. Leah?
Yeah, I was a swimmer my whole life, so I'm pretty familiar with IU's swim team. They have a lot of really great athletes, but UW doesn't have a swim team. They haven't since I think 2009, so I was pretty young when they cut the team. So I'd love to go back and talk to athletes who were on the team at that time about why it was cut and what they think about that. Because I know there's a lot of people who are, native Washington swimmers that wish that UW still had a team going. So that's something that interests me.
Great. Jacob, bring us home.
Yeah, one story that I'm really looking forward to telling is I'm working on an investigation right now about the Missouri baseball team and the struggles that it's faced over the last, especially 5 or so years, um, with the lack of funding. That's one of the reasons I started requesting all these athletic budgets to see where Missouri's baseball spending actually compares to the rest of the SEC, because it's been frankly widely criticized for being the worst program in the league and never having any money. And that's what the coach has been saying for the last 2 years. And I think it's mostly true, but I'm trying to talk to former coaches and former athletes to see what other pieces of the puzzle are there that make Missouri one of the bottom feeders. Actually, we're doing better this year, so maybe not the greatest time to put it out, but it's still a cool story to be able to pursue.
Jacob, I would love nothing more than having people who complain that they don't have any money and they don't have the resources, and then you do all the digging to find they actually do, and they're just terrible.
Yeah,
Well, I found that they definitely don't have the financial that side of it. I don't know. The facilities are also pretty bad from multiple sources that I've heard, and been to the stadium a bunch of times. So, yeah, that would have been funny though.
But that could lead to a bigger question. Looking at, and I don't know when the anniversary is, but you could turn that into a big project about Missouri joining the SEC, right? And I
Yeah,
think most people judge that move based on football and men's basketball. And they're like, okay, Missouri's kind of held their own. But if you look at all the sports, what has it been like to compete in the SEC for them? That's interesting.
absolutely.
yeah, super. That's
There is no
incredible.
shortage of stories, and we expect all of you to be back next year with amazing, or your teams with amazing reporting as you have done this year. So, unfortunately, I'm so sad to say that our time is coming to a close. Panelists, please accept our sincere thank you for your insights and your comments. Congratulations again to our incredible student journalists. Attendees, we're so grateful that you came for all of your questions. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you will join Drake for another incredible webinar coming up. Everybody have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.